Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I'm so excited to bring to you my new friend, Äna Shellem. That she is a wild shellfish harvester and the owner of the Shellem Seafood Company out of Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina. So hello, my friend.
Hello. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So Äna and I met, 2 weeks ago in person? Yeah. Yes. 2 weeks ago. She stopped by Newbern to say hello to me, but we met because of another, oyster shucker. Is that what Isabella is? Yep.
Yes.
Who's a member of La Dames de Escoffier. And I'm like, do you know this woman who's been written up in Our State Magazine and New York Times? And she's like, yes, I do.
I'm so thankful for that connection. She's such a great woman, and so are you. It's nice to be linked up.
Yes, I'm very excited about it. The show today is From Marsh to Plate, and we're going to talk about Äna's philosophy on fresh local harvests. So tell everybody who you are and what is actually a wild shellfish harvester.
Yes. Okay. So I'm Äna, a commercial fisherman, shellfish harvester, and fish dealer as well. And I harvest clams, oysters, mussels, and stone crab. I also get into some botanicals out there, sea beans, different types of seaweeds, cactus, prickly pear, juniper berries. It's really an adventurous job with lots of different things to go find. And I deliver them directly to chefs here in North Carolina.
Okay, so juniper berries are from the ocean or from the marsh?
On the islands near to where I harvest in the marsh.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So tell me when you wild shellfish harvest, what does that mean?
That means I head out on my skiff and I have pre-orders from my chef. So I'll know that I need to go get 200 mussels for Dean and 400 for Jamie. And I take off. My favorite island to go to is Masonboro Island. And I've learned how to and self-taught and observed from friends how to navigate the marsh and find specifically what I'm looking for as far as the sizing that the chef wants. And I go collect while the tide is low and as it rises, and then get home and deliver to clean bag and tag my shellfish, get it into refrigeration, and then I drive it directly to the chef myself. So it's zero waste, super sustainable. My footprint is very small out there as a one-woman operation. And the chefs that I work with, most I've been with for 8 years now. So there's a lot of trust and loyalty and excitement when certain seasons come through, like October 15th, oyster season. Lots of hype about that. That's my favorite wild season for sure. But it's truly learning and understanding Mother Nature and following what the tide is doing, what the moon is doing, the wind direction. It is such a rewarding and fascinating job, and Mother Nature always has so much to teach me.
Okay, so because you just said the word teach, you in that middle of all that, you said self-taught. So when we were chatting, you told me like you were up in Harlem, you were working in New York City, you were a bartender in Harlem, and then now you're this wild seafood harvester. How did that come about, and how did you self-teach?
Up in Harlem, I was working for Melba Wilson, and I had been working in the hospitality industry since I was 16. But when I met her, she really made me fall in love with bartending and what being in the hospitality can provide to communities and self-fulfillment and all of that. So I ended up coming down to North Carolina because the city turns out I'm an outdoors girl and not a city girl. So my soul was not being fulfilled up there. So I came down here, and actually was for a photography job that brought me down to do headshots and comp cards for some actors here. And because that was my world prior to the restaurant world and fishing as well. But the ocean, it's this little town, Wilmington, Wrightsville Beach, is so charming. And the way I felt when I looked at the ocean here versus the waters up in New York City, I felt really grounded and like it was where I needed to be. So stuck with the restaurant world, got into fine dining, ran a few bars, loved just the industry people in general, front of house, back of house, the way we all understand each other so well or don't. And then it's hilarious. And I met my now husband, John, when I was bartending. I gave him my number and told him we should hang out. And we started taking the kayak out and getting clams and mussels and oysters. He taught me like how to do it initially. And then we'd come home and cook that together. And he's in the restaurant bar world too. We actually own a bar here at the beach, but I just kept falling in love with the Marsh, and it would be so hard to stop once I started clamming and mussling before I did it professionally. And when I wanted to leave bartending and work for myself, just the bartending became very like triggering as I was healing. And I was like, I don't want to bartend anymore. And he said, well, what would make you happy? I said, I need to be in the Marsh, and I still want to be in the restaurant world. I love the chefs and people that I work with, but I just need to do it in a different way. So I learned that I needed to get my commercial license. And because I wanted to make an actual living at it, I discovered I needed to become a fish dealer. So I'm in charge of the whole process of that shellfish from the marsh to the table, try to cut out middlemen and just get that direct connection. And it ended up really blossoming into something fantastic. Keith Rhodes started buying from me. He's got Catch here, but he was doing a cooking
He's been a
demonstration.
guest on my show.
Oh, he's so great. Him and Angela, they're just such wonderful people. And he brought some of my shellfish up for a showing of this show, Order Fire, that he did in Charlotte, and featured my harvest on the show. And so we wanted to feed the people. And there were like 8 or 9 chefs sitting in the audience that came up to me afterwards, and they're like, we want these wild mussels. We want you to harvest. So I said yes to everything then. And I was driving to harvesting and delivering to Charlotte. And then Jamie Davis at the Hackney reached out and started delivering to him. Lone Cedar up in the Outer Banks with Vicky Bass Night. Things just fell into place, and it kept growing and getting better from there. And I make 2 different shellfish beers with a brewery in Charlotte. Yeah, their Free Range Brewery is also really wonderful people, and they use all North Carolina ingredients 100% with the beers we make. So there's a Shellem's Mussel Stout. I'm sorry, this is a Kolsch this year. And then the Oyster Stout, the Sea of Companions. This business has led into so many different directions. And now I've got really a solid lineup of chefs where I can have we can both have consistency. I can have consistent orders, the name on the menu. I go and get involved with fisherman dinners with Dean, and we really try to make the consumer education a big factor about sustainability, seasonality, and all that farmers and fishermen have to deal with that we don't have to see, and we just get the pretty plate. But most people don't have to see, we get the pretty plate. But sharing our stories it's really important to bring that.
Well, and one thing, so a couple things in there. So oyster season, and I always thought it is when it's an R in the month of the year. Is that correct?
For wild harvest, yes.
For wild harvest. Okay. April has an R, but yeah, never mind.
But yeah, it ends March 31st. It gets confusing. But the R word would really just be for the wild harvest. There are farmed oysters that you can eat year round. And there's a booming aquaculture population here. They're calling it like the Napa Valley of oysters because of all the different varieties and all the farms that are popping up on the coast. And they do incredible work. So yeah, you can eat those farmed oysters year round. But my oysters, because they're wild, it's a different type of oyster. And so that's why the colder months are better for mine. And the seasons can be delayed too, sometimes, depending on how much rainfall each year. It might, and fingers crossed, not for this month with all the storms, my gosh. But yeah, Mother Nature will dictate all of my seasons. Hopefully this one will not be stopped short or delayed, but.
Well, and we were talking about this when we had lunch, is that like, you don't realize, you said something about making sure when you're talking to your chefs or you're eating at a restaurant, if there was just a storm, you're probably not eating wild seafood because of like what the storm does. Can you explain a little bit about that, what that means?
Absolutely. So with the storms we've had, you couldn't have wild or farmed because the runoff from the streets causes contamination in the water, and all shellfish are filters, so they become contaminated. On the North Carolina, if it rains over 1.5 inches, it is liable to close. So we've had some weeks with like 6 inches, 8 inches, and there's a website that posts the proclamations for water testing every day with Division of Marine Water Quality. And they will post where it's safe to harvest. Because even if it's not a storm, there could be a sewage spill, or there could be some type of chemical or that we should be aware of. So harvesters, farmers, we all have to stay very in tune with the water quality on the coast. And even if it doesn't rain 1.5 inches, any rain can cause the salinity of the oyster to go down. And I happen to love really salty, briny oysters. So when it rains, even when it opens up, I'll wait a little bit and like test things out before I jump back on to the full workload. But the nice thing about the way our state works, we have a trip ticket program. So every fisherman, every farmer has to report where they harvest, what time, when it was brought back to the dock, what time it got into refrigeration, when it traveled. You can trace the whole route of where the shellfish comes from and where it's going, which is so important for just public safety and consumption. So the water quality has a huge impact, and these storms have a huge impact.
You don't think about, now I'm thinking George Clooney and what's his name, and Marky Mark, and that where they go, they're fishermen and they go out into the sea and they die in that big wave, right?
Oh, yes. I know you're talking.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know the movie, but I just like them because they're in the movie.
Yes, absolutely.
You see them talking about on the maps, right? But there's so much more to what you do than looking at and even we're doing this show today. You're like, okay, as long as it's not low tide, I could be on at noon, right? So, there's so much more science that goes into just going out. Like me and my dad used to go crabbing. Like we would go down into the Annapolis, Maryland, and put the chicken legs on the strings and crabs. But we didn't pay attention to low tide and high tide. We're just having a dad and daughter. But
so for you and wonderful.
Yeah. But for you to do your job and to get Jamie and Keith and everyone else their oysters, you've got to know your stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely. And there's so much safety and precaution that goes into it just to make sure the industry stays alive.
Yeah. And does the FDA regulate your seafood when you harvest it? Who does that?
That's the Division of Marine Fisheries and DEQ, the water quality. But because I'm just on the interstate list, for selling only to North Carolina. If you sell outside of North Carolina, then the FDA is part of the inspection. But I've got quarterly inspections, surprise inspections. There's HACCP training, which is hazard analysis critical control points for wherever you're processing or bringing in any type of shellfish. So I'm a geek and love paperwork and love all of that and temperature control. And so it's very fulfilling for me. And every different type of fish has a different protocol and rules and regulations. So you really have to stay on top of new rules that come through and make sure you're doing it right. Because there's a lot of factors that could ruin a lot of good shellfish.
Okay. So you're sitting in your boat. You live on a boat. You're in your house right now. But what's a typical day look like for you? So low tide, did you go out this morning? Was it low tide this morning, or do you only go out and is it only in the afternoon? How does that work? And what does your day look like from that point on?
So today, low tide is not until this afternoon. So after this, I'll hop on my boat and go fishing, harvesting. But the tide changes every day. Sometimes low tide will be before sunrise or after sunset. And then legally, I can't go harvest because you can't harvest after dark. Legally, I can't harvest on Sundays in North Carolina.
Wow. Why is that? Just because an old church law?
Bible Belt action. Yeah. So I plan out my weeks and my orders based on the moon cycle. If it's a full moon, a new moon, or if it's the mid-lunar cycle, those can all have huge impacts on how well the tide will drop. And then the wind direction has a massive impact. We had a northeast wind for about 3.5 weeks, I think. And that in my area keeps the tide from dropping. So it makes my job a lot harder. And I don't mind it in the summer months where I can get more in the water, but I don't want to, tried diving for oysters in February before, and it was a miserable process. So I really have to plan my events, my heavy delivery orders, and I keep my chefs informed with that. I'll say, next week I've got a northeast wind, and as the days get shorter, my work time gets more compact as well. So there's a lot of planning, a lot of obsessing over it, really, which is why it's really nice to live on my boat and keep my work boats next to it, because I can keep a direct eye on what the marsh is doing and how quickly the tide is dropping or not. So I first of all, I have my orders from my chefs, so I know exactly what I'm going to go get that day. Mm-hmm. Wait for low tide. I typically leave 2 hours before low tide, 2.5 hours, so I can get there. At that time, I start mussling, and then as the tide drops, then I'll switch to oystering, because that comes in next, and then clamming. And then when I have a really good low tide, you can see stone crab nests that are on the edges of the oyster beds. And then you learn things like, because the stone crabs are eating the clams. If I'm in a clammy area, you're like, everything is so connected out there. And and you just, like I said, learning things all the time, but everything really is in tune with each other. Like there's baby stone crabs up in the mussels, eating the mussels and burrowing in there. So anyway, harvest as the tide is low, then as it rises, come home. I normally bag all of my shellfish out in the marsh and tag it according to exactly when I get it back to the boat. Come home and clean it, and then wash all that mud off, because it is a muddy, mucky, dirty job. And then I wait for the shellfish to get to legal temperature, which can be within the time that I drive to the chef. And I deliver within 24 to 48 hours. And it's just a wonderful process. And I love the physical labor. I love all the challenges. I love the crazy weather we have to deal with. I love the cold, and I love the isolation out there. There's so many unbelievable, like, peaceful moments that just make you count your blessings. And those can even just be from having new challenges with a squall that comes through, or just the tide not working for you, and trying out plan Bs and plan Cs. And yeah, it is rewarding and fun. So that's a long description.
I can't wait to go do that with you. So it's very intriguing that you're like, okay, so then you're mussling, and then you're clamming, and then you're doing oysters, and there's a reason for that. What's the reason for doing it in that order?
As the water falls and things become exposed. So at the lowest of tides, it's great if the oyster beds are exposed. Sometimes they're not. Okay. And the oyster beds where I harvest, when they're at the top of the bed, the oysters at the top of the beds kind of grow in those cluster like feathers, and they don't have like a cup or a nice aesthetic. So my favorite oysters are really along the edges, and that have been tumbled by the intercoastal. And because when they're going to sit next to these beautiful farmed oysters that have been rotated in cages and grown so beautifully, I need to make sure that my wild oysters have that same appeal, cup size. I love to harvest as close to the ocean as I can to keep that salinity up. I stay far away from river mouths, which is why Mason Borough is my favorite. But to get those types of oysters, they're definitely on the edges here. And then clamming changes with every storm. Okay. Especially after Hurricane Florence, shellfish was closed from that storm for like 6 months. It was awful.
So what did you do?
I worked on friends' boats. My friend's Seaview Crab Company here, Sam Romano. I went and worked on the oyster farm with him. I went crabbing with his brother Joe. I already knew what it was like to budget, but it just reinforced that importance. I actually ended up painting oyster. I'd go to an island and find the sun-bleached dead oyster shells, and I painted little Santa Clauses and sold them to surf shops here. Like Surf City Surf Shop really helped me through with that. But it was neat because I got to learn a lot about the other facets of other types of fisheries. So, and Bass Night, I'd go up to be with. Anytime the waters close, I always reach out to Vic Bass Night to go help her with her crabs or shrimp and her restaurant. So it all works out. Okay.
Well, all right. Adia on Instagram said, "Thank you so much. I just learned something new today."
Yay. That's wonderful.
Type in what you actually learned, Adia, if you're still watching, so that we can know what you learned. I mean, devastating. I mean, that you were out of work for 6 months because of that. But I mean, you also found even painting the oysters that you're still kept in the business and working on other people's boats. I mean, so Mother Nature, I mean, you've mentioned her quite a bit, and we're both in North Carolina, and everybody's seen the news on Western North Carolina now, but she can wreak some havoc. So, but
Yes.
you also, one thing that you said to me about her is that you love being out there with her. Like what? And so talk about how has shaped your perspective on sustainability.
Yes. Okay. I think Mother Nature, first of all, is just incredibly healing. And my job specifically forces me to be in the moment, have full situational awareness because of any creatures or people or boats or dangers. So being in the moment has been, working and living in the moment has been just really good for like mental health all around. If you have anxiety or depression or anything like that, it's been so helpful in that way. And as has working alone, I've always liked that. But her with the sustainability factor and seasonality, the chefs I work with really like to put the emphasis on what's in season and what we should be enjoying. So she teaches me that all the time. And sometimes I'll expect something to be there 1 month, but because the waters are warming and things are moving around, like the tulip snails or whelks will show up unexpectedly. And then some years they show up exactly when you know they need to be there. So there's lots of curveballs. There just has to be, with sustainability, that zero waste factor is important. So I never take anything from the marsh that does not have a loving destination. And I keep my footprint small out there. Like my methods are not invasive. I have a 3-pronged garden rake that I use for clamming. I have a hori knife, which is like a garden tool for mussling. And then I make a cluster buster for oysters. It's a small operation, but I really like.
Okay, what's a cluster buster?
Cluster buster is like it's a piece of steel that I smooth out on one end, so it's sharp but not knife-like. And then I've got notches that I saw in or mark in for 3 inches, because legally a wild oyster has to be at least 3 inches. So, and that's when you come with me, it'll be a good reference as you're looking for the oysters that you want to have that little 3-inch marker. But it's like you want to break off any excess shells, so you want to only bring back the single oysters. Yeah.
Dia said that she learned that the difference between what to do first in terms of getting the clams, mussels, and et cetera, never knew there was a process. And she also just wrote that she said she watched The Deadliest Catch and Wicked Tuna, so never thought about the small seafood items and how they were collected. Nice. So yeah,
that's a great show.
Totally different perspective. I mean, because it's like that movie I was saying, they're going out there and getting all those, all those big fish and things, and it's dangerous. I mean,
yeah, and even
yeah. And how dangerous is what you do?
If there's a thunderstorm, incredibly dangerous. You don't know you need to know your marshes, your waterway, your sandbars. If you don't plan ahead, you can really get in a pickle out there. But I've got sea tow and I've got a GPS watch. I've got I will definitely take the right precautions before I go out, and I won't go when it's dangerous. If the winds are howling over like 48 or 50, John will.
Okay, I'm like scared to get on my paddleboard when it's higher than 10. So
the winds can come in as a surprise, and then I've learned a lot about needing to stay and wait till the storm passes, or how to drive my boat accordingly. So I feel like a better captain when each of those challenges come through. But it's neat when you're talking about the offshore boats and those huge boats with the big fish. Oh my God, so scary for what they go through all the time and the challenges they face. And you have to have a crew with that. And what I really love about my situation is I just need me and my skiff. And since Mother Nature is so unreliable, I've thought about getting employees, but I'd want to pay them accordingly. There are dangers out there, the liability, the insurance. I just want to stay in my small operation. So I'll stay inshore. I do like, though, that I hope to inspire people. And this is something that I like to go talk about at schools, because getting into the fishing industry can be intimidating, especially if you do want to go offshore. There's a lot of money to get those boats and go. And but you can start small, and this is a dying generation really, or dying industry, unfortunately, because it is so hard to get into with investing, but you can start small on a little John boat or a little skiff and start working with a fish market, or I hope to inspire others, especially young ladies, to give it a try and know that they can actually make a happy life doing it.
That's awesome. And when we were chatting over lunch, you also said you had a lot of customers at first, right? And then you've actually narrowed that down because of the zero waste mentality and the harvesting of what they want and what they need. You're making a good living on a smaller plate, oyster plate.
Yes. Yeah. Well said. Definitely. Yeah. Pre-COVID, I think I had about 30 restaurants, and I had them scheduled and cycled, and it was so intense and so exhausting, but so I was like, I'm doing it. And then COVID hit, and that was so devastating. And even though our bar was shut down too, and I did not want to change my practices. I didn't want to say, okay, whatever, I'll go get as much as I can and sell it to a fish house so the general public can get it. But so a lot of the products I'm pulling in, like the wild North Carolina mussels, can be intimidating to a consumer who hasn't cooked it before. So, and I don't want to ever bring in something that I don't know where it's going already. So I waited out with my chefs. And again, I worked on friends' boats over COVID, but because I didn't change my methods, there were certain chefs who had been with me since the beginning that really stuck with me, and Ashley Christensen and Sunny from St. Rock. And as we were coming out of COVID, so excited. Like, all right, we're ready to place orders. We're ready. We have these dishes we want to do and keep you on the menu. And just to be there for each other was so great. Right. And I would donate shellfish shellfish was not the best to go thing over COVID, but they're getting creative and making chowders and casseroles and things. And so this hospitality industry really looks out for each other when they need to. So then after COVID, the world has come back to whatever it is now. I've got a smaller group of chefs, but I get to see them every other week, every week, once a month, depending how far away they are. And that mutual support, trust, and loyalty. But we all get so excited about it. So the friendships, I think those relationships and those friendships, and everybody geeking out over the seasons and over how it all works, and the beautiful presentations they come up with. It's really wonderful. I think that transfers to the plate. I think it transfers on social media, and my chefs love to go harvesting with me too. Ricky Moore, he came out with me. Dean
Newburn, man.
Ash, he's another incredible human. I feel so lucky to work with the people that I do. And I know that they love and respect and appreciate my harvest. And they also know the value of that freshness of it being delivered from the fishermen.
Okay, so how much are you bringing in? I mean, if I'm on a boat, how many oysters are you bringing in on a week, or and clams and mussels? And because it's not five, it's a whole bunch.
No, Monday, let's see, or this past week, Burdetto ordered 800 mussels, and they order between.
And you're doing all that by yourself?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
I feel like a Viking out there, and that's not even a lot. They'll order between 800 to 1,400 mussels every week. Most restaurants will get 600 oysters a week from me. Seabird will do that twice a week sometimes. Clams, in years past, there have been a couple times where I've been able to get 900 or 1,000, but I've tried to keep those harvests smaller since I can't rely on sizing with clams. A lot of the clams in my area are giant. There's not a lot of middle necks, so I do small batches of those for select chefs. But the oysters, I cannot legally get over 5 bushels by myself a day. But since I sell them by the single, by the piece, and not by the bushel or half bushel, when I fill up buckets, there's a lot of more value with those 100 count bags. And the beer I make, the Sea of Companions with free range, we do 12 to 1,500 oysters for that brew.
Wow.
And some days I can, especially when I have the orders, really go and knock it all out. But I can also break it up throughout the week to fill the orders. But because they're all local or planned ahead, I know I can make it happen. I think the most mussels I got in a day was 2,500. And when you have oyster season is so busy and tricky because everything's available. So I really need to take full advantage of those good low tides. And the great thing is also, since I'm not delivering to the general public who might have a demand, when I say, hey, chefs, I could only get, you wanted 600, but I can only get 300 clams today. And they're like, that's okay. We'll let people know. And what I love about seasonality is that everything shouldn't be available to us all the time. So that's another part of the consumer education. And when I have to tell my chefs no as often, or as I don't like to do that, but when I do and explain to them why, it makes sense to them. And because they've gone fishing with me, they'll be like, oh, I know what type of tide you're talking about. And it just, that mutual understanding and respect is really awesome.
That's awesome. All right. So Adia on Instagram is saying, wow, that's amazing. You are a Viking. And have a good day. And then she said, how many in a bushel of oysters?
A legal bushel should be 2 5-gallon buckets. And if you see in the DMF rule book, it'll say 300 oysters is also a bushel. But I think everybody has a different idea, really but legally, if you go to a fish market with two 5-gallon buckets full of oysters, that will be 1 bushel.
Okay. All right. That's a lot of oysters.
That is a lot of oysters.
I know. Oh my God, my dad would be in heaven. She just piped in. Thank you very much for that answer. So what challenges, well, we've kind of talked a little bit about the challenges weather-wise, but what challenges do you face as a wild harvester compared to the other types of like farming oysters versus and commercial operations?
I think the challenges I face that would be different from theirs would be, I don't always know. I mean, like when I explore a new area, I don't know if I'm going to go find if it's a good spot for mussels or if it's a good spot for clams. So I really have to, look at the way streams come out of the marsh, the way the mouth of the streams open, if their proximity to oyster beds, how deep into the marsh I can go for mussels. It's truly going to hunt things down. It's like there's a hunt to it where the farmers have cages and things and they have a whole beautiful operation that they're working with, but nothing is just there waiting for me to come tumble or talk sweetly to. So, and that's why I have never really wanted to go into farming, is because there's something about the hunt and knowing, not like they're moving. But there's something really neat too. Like this Monday, actually, and last week, I had to go north to an area that I don't normally go to when I was in a whole brand new spot. And I had learned what type of plant life to look at for certain harvests. And whenever I look at the marsh and I just after repetition and doing this for long enough, I thought, be like, that's going to be really muscly over there. Or that's going to be extra clammy over there. And then once you start going and you find out you're right, it's like Mother Nature's taught you all of these things, even subconsciously, that you're recognizing about the environment and where to look and where to go. And some days have been a total flop where I'm like, I just went to all the wrong places today. And I like to move around because I never want to over harvest one area. But then the nice thing about mussels is they grow very quickly. And in my area, there's only a few wild harvesters. I think I see just a handful of other boats out there throughout the season. And Masonboro is an estuary. It's very well maintained. It's super clean, taken care of by the state. And so since last oyster season, I've been looking around at all of these beautiful oysters that I'm so excited to go harvest, and just to see the health and rejuvenation out there and seeing life. And I know we're doing a lot of oyster restoration projects too throughout the area. And there's one spot near Masonboro where they just dumped a bunch of dead shell to help regrow.
That's what I was just going to ask you. Yeah. Because I know in Baltimore, at the Baltimore Convention Center, they partner with an organization up there to collect the oyster shells. And then there's a dump down here in New Bern, probably like 20 miles down, that they actually have a dumpster for the general public to dump their oyster shells in to do that. Yes. So before I ask you that next question, Adia did have another question. She's like, do you do razor clams, or are they in a certain area?
I do not have razor clams in my area. I only see their dead shell, and that's something that or just dead shell just tossed along the sides of the marsh, but I have not been able to figure them out. But it's something I would love to do. for sure. That's a good
And
question.
what is a razor clam? Is that this?
They're the long, skinny ones.
Okay.
Mine are like a classic quahog, chowder, middle neck, little necks. Love to do the razor clams though.
Okay, so let's go back to those shells. So talk about that, the rebuilding of those. So Dia just asked, what do people do with the oyster shells? So I know my friend Allison makes jewelry out of them, but using the clams in the water, what does that do for sustainability wise?
Relocating some oysters or putting in that shell, oysters grow on each other. So it's
Okay.
like their spat will help attach those shells to help grow new shells. So it's a longer process. It's a process of just that regrowth in the marsh to make sure that there is not over harvesting and that we're replenishing. And it's a pretty amazing way that it recycles itself,
Right.
really.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I dated this guy a long time ago when we were up in Mystic, Connecticut area, he was telling me that there were certain areas that were shut down for over harvesting. And so we had to go to different areas. So is that by the chefs redonating or donating back their shells after an event or restaurants that can help with that rebirth then, right?
Yes. And I can't speak to the direct science of it, but I do know that it has been impactful all along our coastline, and I love to see it. And there's certain areas that I've known that have been over harvested and they had been shut down. Those were all filled in over this summer.
Okay.
With the state boats, and it made me so happy to see.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. So I want to go back to the Mother Nature thing because you touched on it a little bit, but how Mother Nature plays a role in mental health.
Yes.
I mean, not just me taking a walk in the morning. I mean, that does help, right? But tell me what
anytime outside is good. Goodness, I've got CPTSD and anxiety and a lot of stuff that keeps me from sleeping well at night. It keeps my brain wants to stay super occupied and not grounded and present like I've learned to become. Like I said, being in the moment and paying direct attention to the work I'm doing, my surroundings has really changed, even the way I breathe. It's helped with sleep. That just seeing that open horizon line is also and how big the ocean is and how small we are. It makes your problems feel smaller, and it just keeps you in a better mindset have a huge impact with how we harvest and our methods, but we are just one small part of all of it. And she just keeps you in your place. And then she shows you just beautiful, wonderful, breathtaking creatures or skies, and the way the salt air smells, and all of it just has this magic to it that I don't know how I could ever stop harvesting. Just being out there. I think nature has a huge impact on people's mental health for sure. So it's good to get out and stop scrolling and go get your hands and feet in the dirt and walk around barefoot. And I think all of that is very just good for the soul for sure. And your heart and all of it.
I was watching my friend's Instagram this morning, and she had her kids on her farm, Shank family farm, and her kids were had their boots on and just jumping in the mud because they raise pigs. And she's like, you gotta let kids be kids. And her little Daisy was almost 2, covered in mud, but she's like,
perfect.
Same thing, being out in Mother Nature and enjoying that. So this is kind of jumping back to, because we were talking about the FDA and a variety of other things on safety. One thing that you said to me earlier, that safe food travels through fewer hands, when I kind of ask you about safety. So can you explain that? I love that philosophy.
Thank you. Yeah, you got to be what was safe, sustainable, inclusive.
And I'm going to ask you that again. Exactly. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. To me, safe food is not overprocessed. There's direct farmers, direct fishermen that are presenting their food and what they have to share with love, with the intent to nourish people. That's what safe food is for me. I know my products are safe, and I know a lot of other people so many people that are trying, we're all working towards the same goal of getting safer, healthier, no chemicals. There's we're all just trying to bring a cleaner, more honest product instead of something that's zhuzhed up or falsely sweetened. Or safety net of food is better people with closer connections to maintain that, which is hard and it's more expensive. But we find ways to make it available for everyone. And yeah.
No, that's awesome. And then on that note, you are on the board of Slow Fish, which is part of Slow Food globally and USA. So talk about what that means. And there's a conference coming up for Slow Fish. So what is that conference about and what is Slow Fish about?
So Slow Fish has our in-person gathering. It'll be the first one that I get to attend in Charleston, November 1st through 3rd. And it's gathering fishermen, lots of farmers, and chefs and people in the industry that shared like-minded values around sustainability, seasonality, asking where your food comes from, to share their experiences, to discuss current regulations, current hot topics, to gather and enjoy that safe food that's sustainable and inclusive. Slow Fish has, before you can even be a restaurant to be considered underneath the Slow Fish and Slow Food umbrella, we really have to see eye to eye on lots of different values and respect for Mother Nature in the process. So I cannot wait for Charleston. I hope you can be there. I know you said you might have a game to go to.
I do. Well, I actually now have to be somewhere else. So I don't think I'm going to make it, but I will definitely look. But 2 years from now, we need to go to Italy together.
Yes. Isabella is going to be shucking oysters.
At Slow Fish. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Awesome. There's so many really talented people that are involved and flying in, and it's going to be like November 1st through 3rd. It's going to be educational and just a celebration of people really standing up for what they believe in as far as safety and sustainability in our industry.
And I want to ask this question, why is that important? And I mean, I know that's a very blanket kind of, maybe it's a trite question, but why is it important that we are more sustainable with seafood, especially, or across the board?
At first, I was thinking, why is it important that we're having this community event? Yeah, I was like, because the camaraderie is so important. Because the gathering will be so big, there'll be a good outreach in Charleston to bring more people in the community to learn something they wouldn't know. But sustainability is so unbelievably important with seafood, because there have been so many operations that have been greed-based or invasive or just not adjusting with the way the world works. Like, you can't always stick with your old ways. You need to adjust if something's hurting something down the food chain. With climate change, we've got a lot of recovery to do with that. I think sustainability is extra important so we can keep eating what we want, and we can look out for future generations who also want to eat fish. And if we don't start making changes and we don't start looking out for Mother Nature, we're going to lose her. And so, yeah, sustainability is so important on so many levels. And I think that there's so much work being done about it, but I'd like for that to be voiced more. So that's why I'm proud to share my voice with it in any way I can.
And the way that you harvest, the wild harvesting, is really important to that, because you're watching what's growing and what's not growing and only harvesting what's there.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. And never overtaking, just getting exactly what the chefs want and coming. I don't have anything sitting in a cooler. There's nothing, there's no back inventory. I've seen operations when I first got started with distributors who wanted me to go harvest and then give it to them and they can sell it for me. I'm like, that's not how I want to work. And with the trip tickets, every harvest tag, you see where the date, when it was harvested. And there used to be, not anymore, but there used to be some kitchens I'd walk into or walk-ins I'd go into, and the fish was already a week old and they just got it. I'm like, what was it doing for a week before it got to you? Like, it's disrespecting the product and the consumer. So there's no kitchen like that I work with anymore. But that was when I first got started. That was 8 years ago. But just making sure I have zero waste and not doing it for money, doing it for the joy it brings me, the joy it brings others, feeding people, again, the friendships with my chefs. But if I don't have an order, knock on wood, that's rare now. But if I don't have an order, I don't have to go, and I can go explore and scout out spots for future harvests. But yeah, everything is honored that comes back on my boat and utilized fully. There's one of the topic points for the Slow Fish Charleston is no waste with using the whole fish, bones and all of it. So I truly believe in that as well. And that's what the chefs I work with also do, and save all their vegetable trimming. There's no waste across the board, which is really nice.
That is really nice. Okay. So any last minute, I don't have any more questions. I mean, I know we could talk for hours.
Good.
We could. What is one final tip that you would give to, because this is eating at a meeting, for a meeting planner who's talking to, I mean, you're selling directly to restaurants. You're not selling to the Raleigh Convention Center, I'm assuming. That would be or maybe even the Wilmington Convention Center. But, what should a meeting planner, when they're talking to their chefs, what could they ask them about the seafood that they're selling or they're offering on their menus to know that it's cleaner or better?
Yes. Event planner should ask definitely where it's sourced. They need to know if it's in season or not. Whatever is local and not imported. There's a big issue with imports, especially with shrimp right now. So asking to even see the trip tickets or the paperwork, asking. When you said the event center in Raleigh, instantly it just made me think of local seafood. They're a really great dealer and distributor that they could do it.
Yeah.
And they share a lot of the same values I do, but the direct sourcing would be important.
Okay.
Asking if the fishermen, depending on the event, if the fishermen would want to come in and check the oysters or be a part of the process to be able to share their story and they share the freshness and get people excited. Because I know the farmers, and whenever you can give someone so hardworking recognition like that, everybody succeeds because you build each other up. Man, what else would I?
No, I think those are great. I don't want to inundate it, but I mean, those are great ways to think about it. And even when you're going to a restaurant, and I'm going to put a list of at least the ones that I know of that you sell to, Ricky.
Thank you.
And I'll post that later. But even being able to go to a restaurant and asking that, because I'm going to tell you that I was in Hong Kong? No, I was in China and I had Boston lobster. That was not sustainable. No.
That's so weird.
I know. But they put it in the mason jar with the clasp on it and they put lemongrass and lime in it.
I would have eaten it, but it
steamed it in the jar and then they opened it in front of me. Oh, it was beautiful. It was so good too.
Oh, that's
that was not a sustainable dish. And who knows if the lobster actually came from me. But yeah. No, but I think those are important questions to ask when you're thinking about it. And actually, I went to a hotel. I was at the JW Marriott in Austin, and chef came with me. Okay, here's where I buy my meat from, and here's where I buy this is what we do with any leftover foods we have. And I was just so impressed that he came prepared with that. It also, I think, helped that the general manager had seen an article I had written about sustainability and questions she asked about food and beverage. But I love what you're doing. And I think it's really important that I like what you said, honor what we're sourcing and what we're giving. So,
yes. And it's whole journey to be enjoyed. And thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So everybody, Äna is on Instagram at Shellem Seafood Company. If you're on Instagram, you can follow her there. And actually, I will just put this in here too. Is it seafood.com? I don't know why my .com. There we go. ShellemSeafood.com. Is that right? Or
there's no
O in there.
ShellemSeafood.com.
Hide.
Yeah. And I post whatever restaurants I'm supplying seasonally there.
Oh, you do? Okay. All right. Awesome. So there we go. ShellemSeafood.com. And just so you know, she married into this name, and I just love it because it's Shell''M with the name of the company. So
it works out very well. His family's like, how? No one's done this. They were boat builders. Okay. And now I'm the seafood side. So I always go up to see my in-laws with fresh shellfish in hand.
That's so awesome. Very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending time with here and educating Adia and whoever else was on here watching Everybody stay safe and eat well. Next week, I will be in Las Vegas for IMAX, and I will be coming to you live Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday with some really fun conversations there. And so stay tuned for those Instagram and social media posts about those speakers. But until then, stay safe and eat well and eat Äna's shellfish in North Carolina.
Thank you so much. This was so wonderful. Appreciate you.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate you too. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.